to go ahead and get started. So, hi, everybody. My name is Jenny. Welcome to Miami Podcast. Today, I have a super special guest with us. And I feel like this person doesn't need an introduction. So, I'm going to do my best to do it justice. We have Junot Diaz joining us today. He is, or I would argue, you are one of the most important writers to represent Hispanic Americans working right now. And I think it's so important to have people like you putting out work. You are a professor, a writer, an educator. You are a Pulitzer Prize winning author. All these accolades that I could just go on, but I'm going to stop there so that we can get to chatting. And thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you, Jenny, for having me. I know it's not easy to put these things together, so I appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure for me. This is a treat because as I mentioned to you in my initial email, I'm a former teacher. So your book played a big role in the classroom for me, and it's an honor to be able to talk to you. So I wanted to start with, obviously, at the beginning, your childhood. You were born in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and you immigrated with your family to New Jersey. How was that journey?
Well, I mean, I had sort of the kind of immigrant childhood that I think, for all of us who are immigrants, I think that how we understand that immigrant process is very important. Like, what is the story we tell ourselves? And, I came at a very specific time. I came after the Trujillo dictatorship. I arrived in the United States in the 70s. And I came from a very humble family, very poor family, into an area of central New Jersey, right outside of Perth Amboy, where there was almost no Latinas, no Latinx, none of our communities were present. And so I won't lie to you, I don't recommend that. Immigrant lives are never easy, unless I guess you're super loaded, but certainly not the immigrants that I grew up with. We didn't have easy ones, but yeah, that was a challenge. I mean, I always joke around. There were plenty of people within our community who didn't even know what Dominicans were.
Right. So did they confuse you guys with Mexicans?
Well, in this case, it was mostly Puerto Rican and Cuban and Colombians.
Right. That makes sense in the area.
Yeah. And they just had no idea what the hell we were. They were like, what the hell is a Dominican? That's how wild it was. It was kind of, it shows you that this was a time period when, you didn't have the kind of integration on social media. You didn't have like Wikipedia. People weren't on Twitter. People weren't seeing each other's videos. I came to the United States completely ignorant. I had no concept at all what the United States looked like. I never saw a picture of the United States before I arrived. Never.
That must have been quite a shock then.
It wasn't easy. I mean, but again, as kids, you know how it is for those of us who know and work with young people. They have a resilience that as an adult, I wish I had. I rolled with it.
Right. That's so true. Yeah, because you think back to what you go through as a child, and it really is that human spirit at its finest.
Yeah. The youth, I tell you.
Yeah. How did you cope with the language barrier?
I did not cope with it very well. I had a lot of difficulty. My siblings, we were 5 siblings altogether, and my other 4 siblings really kind of just learned English very, very fast. It took me a few years. I had to be put in special instruction. I had a lot of difficulty with English, so that didn't help either. But one compensates.
But that's amazing, because now you have mastery of the language so well that you write novels.
Yeah, I think that came out of that experience. I think I really, really compensated.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. Do you remember any teachers that were like, I don't want to say made a difference, but really kind of made you fall in love with the language?
Yeah, my speech therapist, Mr. Wall, Mr. Wiley. Yeah, I mean, teachers, let me tell you, I was one of those, for my first 4, 5, 6 years, teachers were the world to me.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for them, I would never have made the transition the way I made it. So I got nothing but, endless respect and admiration and gratitude. I mean, just a sense of debt.
Yeah. I feel the same. I can remember everything about certain teachers. The Besides their name, you know what I mean? Like the tone of their voice, their warm energy, their enthusiasm. Teachers are they really do make it or break it,
Yeah,
Because
no
I also
question.
remember those teachers that really gave me bad experiences. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, most certainly.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you about writing as an art form for you. What was that first experience with writing that made you go, wait a minute, I think I can do this, or I have to do this, right? Because most artists feel like you you need this for your soul.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting with me that I had one of those, I had kind of uh, I don't want to say a situation, or I guess my kind of reality was that I loved books. I loved reading. I wanted to participate in books and reading. I wanted to participate profoundly in literary culture. Then I discovered that I found writing incredibly difficult. And what was fascinating is that, people say they find writing very difficult and they turn around and write a book every other year. I don't find writing
Right.
difficult on a 1 or 2 year term. I find writing difficult in a way that takes like 10 years to write a book. And what was fascinating was that I had to come to terms with that the thing that I was called to do, I found very, very hard. And I have to tell you, often whenever I talk to young people, I always tell them sometimes we have talent in things that we find very, very difficult. And so that was mostly my experience. My love for books was always undimmed and really, really intense, in some ways kind of pure. But the difficulty I had with writing was surprising because, hey, sometimes we love things that don't always come easy. And that was my experience.
Right. And I think that's so important too, that message that even though it's not easy, it's something that you are compelled to do, and therefore you shouldn't just give it up.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not the it's sometimes it's we sometimes we get a lot of stuff from television that isn't very helpful, and we tend to see the end result. And I think a lot of young people have this idea that if you're going to have talent at something, that means that it's like a young adult novel.
Yeah.
You're born with this innate talent, it comes easily, or it suddenly leaps out of you at a moment of pressure. That's not my experience. I had
And
to
you're going to get it perfect every time.
Yeah, or close enough. I know
Right.
I had to chisel this thing out of granite.
Yeah. That's such an important message, because it's true, especially with social media, which brings me to uh you know exactly that point. You mentioned that reading, your love for book came from a very young age. Do you think growing up nowadays we're losing readers due to this uh electronic addiction, for lack of a better word?
Well, I mean, that's an accurate description. Look, yeah, I don't have. Look, you can show me book sales all you want all day long, but the reality is that I think it's becoming harder and harder for people to find time to read.
Yeah.
I think that certain groups of people are doing most of the reading. And I think that literary culture is not as essential a part of people's lives. How could it be? We're competing with Netflix. We're competing with screens. I mean,
Right.
my God. It's just so easy to sit there and scroll versus actually reading. So there's no question literary culture is under threat. I think that, of course, is nothing new. I think there's only been rare periods in histories where literacy and literary culture were, sort of would be considered to be prospering. And I think we've got to, fight the good fight. We've got to continually, try to bring people into the circle of literary culture. We got to continue to push books and create modeling. I mean, look, if your young people are seeing you on your phone all day long, why do you blame them for not wanting to read? My friends are like, I had a friend of mine the other day come in. I love this guy. I love him to death. And he was complaining about his kids being on their screens all day. Well, this cat is on his screen all day, and I had to kind of gently remind them. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm no expert, but last time I looked, if you're going to be on your screen all day, why ain't your kids going to do it?
Right. Exactly. And it's difficult to navigate because then they have screens for everything in their life, right? School, now social activities, since we can't really be as immersed with each other as before. And now entertainment, everything's through a screen. So
the speed, there's a lot of difference between the slow speed of reading and the incredibly fast speed of the digital.
Right. Do you think your life would have been different if you were growing up now?
I don't think I would have made it.
Really?
I don't think I would have made it. No, I can't imagine this pressure. I think I already suffer from depression. I think the demands of this kind of social media, panopticon would have cracked me. I'm someone who requires a lot of, time to read, a lot of quiet.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. For me, for everything good that social media is and everything good, ultimately it's like an extension of high school.
Yes.
A lot of
yes.
moronic bullying and groupthink, and there's a lot of good stuff too. But ultimately, I didn't like high school. I more or less dropped out, and as soon as I took a look at what was happening in social media, I was like, yeah, this is like high school part 2, and I wouldn't have made it.
I couldn't agree with you more. Like most of my friends have Facebook and all the other social media platforms, and Facebook came about when I was in college. And I never got it. I never got the appeal of it. I was like, why do I want to see these people on the computer when I don't even care for them in real life? And now it's become this whole thing where if you don't participate, you almost miss out on life opportunities, to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me. I'm just talking about myself. Other people have other things that they really like.
Yeah.
Kind of just, I'm like, yo, do you? You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not looking for converts to my craziness. I'm hoping they're not looking for converts. I'm like, yo, everybody do you. I want to read books, and I don't need people, I don't need people barking at me all day long, and that's cool. Other people like it.
It's true. It's just like you mentioned, there's a pressure there that I guess we're not really going to know the repercussions until these kids are a little bit older and we really get to see what it's like for them growing up under this weird sense of the world where everything is real but not really because you're behind a screen. It's interesting.
No, I've just been glad. Let me tell you, I keep saying it. I just tell my friends, I'm like, I'm so glad I was not raised now. I would not have survived.
I know. I can't even imagine what it would be like. I'm a little concerned for my own kids, but
no, they're heroes.
We're trying our best.
Hey, they're heroes. The young people today, that they are heroes for putting up with this.
Yeah, I agree. Let's get to one of my favorite novels from you, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. This novel is, and as I'm sure you've heard from so many other people, I don't think I'm going to say anything new, but it's so funny. It has so many different dimensions, and I really think it's a standout for Hispanic American community. did how did you identify with the character of Oscar? Or did you
Yeah.
identify?
Yeah, no, I mean, I find it hard to write without that identification. I think, look, I think for me, I was a big old nerd, very, very big nerd. I had a lot of, you know, a lot of similarities to Oscar and a lot of a lot of like differences. But someone who loved science fiction, someone who had a kind of a tangled relationship with his family, someone who cared about his family, but at the same time was tormented, all that made sense to me, you know.
Right.
And I thought for me what mattered about this character, and it was that he was part of a family that I understood. Oscar makes sense to me only because he's got Lola, he's got his mother, you know, and he has got, you know, La Inca, and all of these, this kind of this strangely sort of both connected and
Mhm.
fractious Caribbean family made perfect sense to me. And so I think that's the way I did it. When I designed the novel, I designed it as a story of a family. So I created the family all in one piece.
Right. And I think that comes across beautifully. I Some of the themes in your novel are very, I want to say, all encompassing, right? Like we deal with cultural identity, poverty, politics. How did you navigate having to touch upon all these difficult themes?
Yo, let me tell you something. You don't even know you're doing it. Honestly, you're just trying to get from point A to point Z. Um,
Really?
yeah, I was just trying to tell this story. Now, of course, I structured it in certain ways that were going to, you know, they were going to engage in certain
Hmm.
sort of political fields. So, you know, I would set the story during a dictatorship. That was going to, you know, sort of
Right.
elicit certain things from the text. This is a family of Dominicans from a certain racial, a certain class background. Will certainly come out of a certain kind of a political, um, kind of a political, gestalt. And all of
Hmm.
these things I knew were going to help me sort of engage critically. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I was more, once I got to set those pieces up, I was just, I was like a person who was way in over their head. I was just struggling to survive. You know, during the writing, I wish I could say that there was this kind of masterful executive mode where I was standing
Right.
the work and moving these pieces slowly, being like, nah. Most of the time, I was just flailing, desperate to understand the book and to get each chapter in place.
Right. I mean, that makes sense and almost makes it even better. I mean,
Wonder.
not that you, I don't want you to suffer, but knowing that it was a process from the heart, right? It makes makes me understand it a little bit more. Um, I want to talk to you about writing as as a lifeline. Does What kind of role does writing play in your life besides obviously you're an author?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean, it's important. I think, again, I'm one of these people who, I mentioned earlier, man, depression, part of my everyday life. I think that writing has had a huge role in regulating me.
Hmm.
It kind of keeps my brain out of some of the pits, you know, the mine shafts, the emotional mine shafts that
Right.
threaten me. And so that's you know, that's been a big part of it. There's also just the fact that you know, writing brings out parts of me that aren't always available in what I call real life. Other people, you know, we were saying people have profound needs for their mediated identities. People like to be who they are in social media. They like to be
Right.
heroes. They like to be funny. They like to be all this. You know, the parts of me that need expression find their expression in my writing. You know, and so there's kind of a kind of a super smart kid that I'm not always in a place to be super smart. There's you know, someone who's kind of really, really kind of, you know, has a lot of compassion and a lot of, you know, personal history, with what I would say people who are older. You know, I was
Right.
raised by my grandparents, and I tend to think my best writing is when I write about older people.
Mhm.
But yeah, there it is. You know, I mean, I think it definitely has meant a lot to me. You know, and and I tell my friends all the time, it keeps me sane.
Yeah, right. That's that's a big one. And it's so important to find something, right? For you it's writing, but it could be something completely different for anybody else that just helps keep you at ease. And
Yeah,
like you say, regulate ourselves because life is tough.
very.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for future writers or struggling writers?
Yeah, but I mean, there's so much advice. I mean, I think like the one thing that there is a lot of is advice, but it doesn't mean that there's not things that aren't worth, aren't worth sort of like emphasizing. And it comes out of my own experience, or at least my own fantasy of what my experience is, right? Because the only thing that we misremember more than life is ourselves. And
Right.
I think that um, I think for me, the of fundamental importance of keeping alive your love of reading.
Yeah.
For me, if you're not reading, I couldn't do what I do. I'm always looking for good books. That encourages and inspires me. The other thing is, if you don't have a community, you need to find one. Um,
Yeah.
you need to have people that you can talk about this with. I myself tend to be much more insular and isolated, but for other people, it works. And ultimately, you know the deal. You got to try to finish your things, whatever you're working on.
Right.
Even if it sucks, just try to get to the end of it.
Yeah. And it's so important what you mentioned about community because writing can be such an isolating process.
Oof.
So it's I had never really thought of it like that, to find a place where you feel like you have a tribe.
Yeah. I mean, I always think that there's no accident that literary culture tends to enter most people's lives during adolescence, which is not only a turbulent time, but it's also
Yeah.
very, very lonely.
Yeah.
There's something about the loneliness of adolescence that lends itself to the community that one finds inside of books.
That's so true. Um, I wanted to jump to our one of the books that gets read. I want to say not every night, but probably 3 times a week in our house, which is Islandborn, your book for children. It's I can't say enough about that book. We love that book in our house. And I feel like I connect with it even more than my kids do, even though I'm not a child. Even I behave like one because there's Lola has forgotten where she comes from and she's trying so desperately to remember and make up this part of her life and put it back together like a puzzle piece. And I'm sure so many other people can relate to that. How did you, I don't want to say come up with that, but where was Islandborn come from? How did you come up with this concept?
Well, I mean, these kinds of books, books for young readers, books for children, um, books that are kind of going to be read collectively.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they have much smaller projects, so you're able to be a little bit more mindful. And in this case, I was like, well, what are the stories um, that are sort of typical of the experience that I belong to, that aren't always narrativized in kids' books. And one of them is this very strange connection that we have to these places that in some ways determine so much of our identity. But for many kids, they have no strong connection, no
Yeah.
awareness. I think Lola is not an uncommon child, our
Right.
community. And then, of course, there was just the aspect that I wanted to write a book about something else. When you read a lot of, kids' books written by sort of white writers, they're not tackling, for the most part, dictatorships, though almost every single diasporic Caribbean and Latin American community has a history of dictatorship that weighs
Yeah.
heavily upon them. And so, those things matter to me. How much being Dominican defined me, and yet I had siblings, defined my family, and yet I had siblings who had never been to the Dominican Republic. And yet Dominicanness and Dominicanidad was central to their identity. And just
Right.
from that fact sprang Islandborn. But I have siblings who were like, I'm Dominican, but had never been in the Dominican Republic. And it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that search, that longing,
Right.
that ghostly connection that one has to a place
Yeah.
mattered a lot to me.
It's like you're existing in two places at once, but yet one of these places you can't really see.
Yeah.
It's
No,
wild.
very, very true.
Yeah.
And
How do you think parents can help their children keep that connection or cultivate that connection between both cultures, or more than two?
Well, I mean, I think, things are a lot easier now in the sense that there's like, once again, one can jump on a screen and quickly show a video,
Yeah.
show photographs. That was even photographs were not as easy. I mean, shoot, I had a handful of photographs from the Dominican Republic. Look, I think I'm not a parent, so I'm sort of cautious about giving too much advice to people who are actually in the real work. But I was a kid, and I'll tell you what
Yeah.
I would have appreciated. I think that, I kind of wish parents were more, at least my parents had been more storytellers. They weren't they didn't narrativize their own lives. They were very modest people, and they didn't talk about the things that they went through. And I kind of don't need stories about their dictatorship days, but I wouldn't have minded hearing more about their joys and their adventures and their relationship to the Dominican Republic. That would have
Right.
been awesome. I mean, if once a week my parents had told a Dominican story that's explicitly, consciously that, it would have transformed my life.
That's true. Yeah. The power of storytelling. It's so simple, but yet we don't do it enough.
No.
That's so true. Yeah. I think I can definitely agree with that, because from my personal experience, I mean, I wasn't born here, but I think my parents were afraid to tell too many stories because we wouldn't become American enough, if that
Yeah,
makes
no.
sense.
Our parents, they didn't have a lot of tools. So
Yeah.
they grasped for the ones that they were hoping would be most effective. And,
Right.
the thing about the trauma of immigration, it's like all trauma, it creates silence.
Yes. Yeah. It's
Mhm.
one huge trauma after the other,
Yeah.
and you're just hoping to make it. So, yeah. But anyway, Islandborn I highly, highly recommend it to all of our listeners. It's amazing, no matter what age you are. But if you have children, you can't go wrong. I've gifted it for Christmas, birthday parties. It's a hit in our circle. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you're a professor at MIT. And we already touched upon how important you believe teachers to be. How do you balance teaching and writing and all your other hats
Well,
that you wear?
I mean, look, basically, I'm just going to say this. I don't have children. So that means I'm like a dilettante. I have so much time. If you don't have kids, you're basically a part-timer in the game of life.
Right.
And so it's certainly a lot easier. If I had children or if I had children and was a mother, in a society like ours that unloads so much on mothers, I think that this issue would be far more fraught. But I have my privileges, and I also just don't have kids. So for me, it's a lot easier.
Right.
I get to read on the job. Let me tell you, I'm one of those people that if tomorrow I won Powerball, I would definitely, quit all my jobs and just focus on writing. It shows
Right.
you that it's course, there are demands that take you away from the art. There's no question. Whether it's an extreme one, let's say you got 3 kids and 2 jobs, or one like mine where you have no kids and you have, one job and some other small things. But ultimately, I have a lot more time than most people. I'm very, very blessed with that. And I try to keep it real simple. You know, I got to I got to read for my job, and that reading helps me for my writing.
Exactly. What's your favorite thing about being a professor?
I did that for me. It's always the kind of the space that you help to create. I mean, you know, the nature of education is that education is meant to be a transformative engagement. It's meant that, you know, when one is educated, um, the person who enters the experience of education is not the person who leaves the experience of education.
Yeah.
You walk into a classroom, and when it works well, the person who walks out is not the person who walked in. And for me, being able to help create that opportunity means everything to me. I was transformed by my education. My teachers created spaces where I could become, and I'm trying to do the same for the students.
Yeah. It's it's so important for teachers to understand that power, because you're right. It's so much takes place in that moment, in that class time, that can be crucial for so many people.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah. So let's talk about my city, which you're familiar with, Miami. What do you
I
think about
am.
yeah. What do you think about the existence of culture here, or lack thereof, some would argue. Some would say we don't really have culture here.
Again, I don't know about that. You know, the person I consider the best living writer, Luis Danticat, lives down in your neck of the woods.
Mm-hmm.
There's an enormous sort of very, very vibrant and multi-layered artistic community, a transnational artistic community.
Yeah.
You have folks who, you know, have lived 2, 3 different countries, and now they're in the Miami area. I guess I don't buy it. Now, look, is that to say that Miami, like most of the United States, has to deal with a reality that arts is underfunded, that arts is disrespected, that you know, there's not a lot of state support? No question. Um, is there kind of something? Is there something to be said about what happens to the arts in a space that sells itself as a vacation paradise? Yeah, I mean, no, I think that there are all unique challenges depending on the places we come from. But again, I think that to kind of paint Miami with one brush is absurd. You know, the amount of good work that comes out of there, the way that so many of our artists, especially our young artists down there, are making wild, fascinating, and interesting things happen. Um, doesn't change the fact that, yeah, everybody outside of certain areas in the United States is struggling against commercialization, is struggling
Right.
against sort of neoliberal impulses, is struggling with communities that have been disinvested in educational areas, is struggling with a kind of a cultural shallowness that is being inflicted on us by our politicians and by our corporations. You know, that these are all real. But you know, one should be cautious, because I guess if you're comparing Miami to New York City, one would say, okay, yeah, all right. But I mean, that's like, how are you going to compare yourself as a ball player to Michael Jordan? You know, if you're going to compare yourself to, you're going to compare yourself to one of the deities, you're not going to come out feeling good. But I just think, you know, very much like New Jersey, Miami punches way above its weight.
Yeah, I'm biased, but I agree with you. We have a lot going on here besides flip-flops and South Beach.
Man, and you meet people, like you meet painters who are coming from Nicaragua. You meet the things, the encounters I've had down there, you know. And then, you know, you have probably the most important the most, I think, central bookstore in all of the country. What Mitch is doing down there, it's like,
Yes.
it's just that
From
you
books
can't,
and books.
yeah,
Yeah.
Mitch is, he, to say that there's not a lot of culture there disrespects how much people like him have done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's and I think that's something that we're slowly getting to for people, as more people decide to come down here due to the political climate or whatever reasons they have, and they're all moving to Florida. I guess they get to see that there's a little bit more to us than the superficiality of it all.
Yeah, fingers crossed for everybody,
Yeah, exactly. I have to ask, behind you, I see the map of for Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I teach Game of Thrones in one of my classrooms.
Oh my God, how lucky
Yeah,
are
it's
those kids?
one of my courses, we teach Game of Thrones. So of course I've got Game of Thrones, and next to it I've got Lord of the Rings. Both,
Yes, I recognize that too.
yeah, both texts I teach. So it's kind of cool. I mean, for me, I don't know.
Of
I don't know if they enjoy it, but I enjoy the teaching of it.
I'm sure they're loving it. Oh my goodness. I would totally take that class if I was there. Absolutely. We are in our house. We're huge Game of Thrones fans.
Oh, nice.
The book as well as the TV series, but the books are definitely up there. So what is your favorite book to read? I know you're a sci-fi fan.
Well, both science fiction and fantasy I love very much. I mean, I think I have like writers, that mean the world to me. I mean, I think the writer Samuel R. Delany, I always say, is just was just foundational for me.
Mhm.
I also, of course, I mentioned my contemporary, Edwige Danticat, as someone who was essential. I mean, for me, incredibly nourishing and inspiring. Again, I grew up in the 80s in the middle of another wave of African American literary sort of excellence. So, I was a person who grew up reading as the books were being published, Toni Morrison's and Alice Walker, Edward P. Jones. The writer Edward P. Jones was just kind of blew my mind. You all have the writer who I admire, and someone who's just a fantastic novelist, Patricia Engel, Colombiana. She's just extraordinary. So folks like that. But when I think of science fiction, I think of fantasy. I can't help it. I'm a big Octavia Butler. She definitely kind of set my path in the world in a way.
Yeah. It's amazing. Have you ever considered writing in Spanish?
No, my Spanish is up and down. It's so funny. I entered the pandemic being pretty fluent, as the way I've been forever. But in my household, we don't speak Spanish, and the lockdown meant that I spent over a year, and my Spanish now just disintegrated. And now that I'm back out in the world, I'm beginning to slowly build it up. But who I was a year and a half ago, not who I am now.
I totally understand. Yeah, it gets frustrating because you feel like, whoa, this is my first language. Why isn't this working the way it used to? But I now that you mention it, the pandemic did have a lot to do with it. We
It
were
messed me up, man.
in our bubbles.
It
Right.
messed me up, yeah.
Well, I'm sure if you ever decide to, I'm sure there's a whole world waiting for you to be able to read your work in Spanish. Well, not your, because it's been translated, but I mean your work in Spanish. Do you have any future projects that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been working on a new novel that's kind of batshit. It's kind of my first attempt at a science fiction book, but I don't know what I'm doing. So it means
That's
that
exciting.
not really. It's actually It's pretty mediocre. It's actually intensely mediocre, but that's okay. I mean, I can look back now on all my books and say like, wow, these things were not bad. Well, if I think this, because, you know, we all should have higher self-esteem to put up with the fact that the world is always bashing us. So I've been told. I look at my other books and I'm like, yo, these things are not bad. These books are pretty good. They're like B pluses. This one,
B pluses.
this one's gonna get this one will be lucky to get through the C. So yeah, I'm writing a science fiction book. It's kind of like I always, a friend of mine used to joke about us as Dominicans, and he used to say, you know, it's like, oh man, she used to say, excuse me, she used to say like Dominicans were Martians. And so I kind of took that and made it explicit. And I'm kind of writing a book about the last Martian hiding out inside of a Dominican community. And of course, you know, you can't, for all of us who come from the Caribbean, if you were going to be an alien, there would be no better place to hide out than in the Caribbean. People wouldn't even notice.
Yeah.
They wouldn't notice you were from another planet. Yeah,
That is so true.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of like having fun. We'll see what happens with it.
Well, I'm sure it's going to come together and it's going to be great. And I'm going to be there because that sounds amazing.
No,
that sounds very exciting. Anything else you would like to?
No, I'm just grateful to be able to talk with you and, you know, give my regards to the young people over there. And thank you so much for taking the time.
No, thank you for joining us. And whenever you're here, we would love to actually have you in person. That would be super fun to get to talk to you again.
Well, I
thank you
appreciate
so much.
Yeah, take good care.
I will. You do the same. And good luck with the new semester. I know you're getting ready for that.
Thank you. Yeah. Cuídese mucho. Y ya
Igualmente.
Hablamos pronto. Chao.
Sí, nos mantenemos en contacto. Un beso.
Gracias. Chao.